Santa Clarita. You are on the legal line with Dennis Kennelly. Needless to say, I am Dennis Kennelly. And my guest today, who we'll get to fairly quickly today because she's going to participate in the first part of the show, is Holly Browdy, who is a well-known entertainment lawyer in Hollywood and Beverly Hills, where most of the deals are done, and is also a former vice president of business and legal affairs at Disney Studios. So I think she knows a little something about the record business and might know how to copyright a song if you got one. And we're going to be talking about all of those things a little later. But first, the fun part. And the fun part is, unless you've been in hibernation for the last week, it has been a legal commentator's field day. Every time you tune in the next hourly news, if you're one of these people that only gets your news in on a 1 hour basis, you'll get something new. And I feel guilty because I don't know what's happened in the last hour. One never knows. For all we know, Trump has admitted something else. But as you know, what's happened is that the Justice Department, Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, who seems to be who's running things on this aspect because Attorney General Sessions has recused himself, has appointed Robert Mueller as the special prosecutor on this case, special counsel. And what this means is that Mr. Mueller has got all the powers of a U.S. attorney, which means he can issue subpoenas, he can go to a grand jury with whatever he wants, he can ask for whatever help he can get. And Mr. Trump is obviously not happy about this, although my own personal view, and we'll ask Holly about this in a minute, is that if he's got nothing to hide, if there is no connection to the allegations that there was Russian influence on his campaign or Russian interference in the electoral process, he should be happy to get it out of the way once in a while. But he's claiming witch hunt. I'm old enough to have been in law school. I just gotten out of law school, as a matter of fact, when the Watergate hearings were going on, and those were really, really good television. They were better than the soap operas every afternoon, as you saw the people testifying. But it's really intriguing. Holly, you got any thoughts on this?
I'm glued to it the way I would be glued to a nighttime soap opera, and I really appreciate the fact that the commentators used to try and make sense of things, and then now they just come on and say, "Well, Bob, it's uncharted territory. We're in uncharted territory here." So I don't know. I'm eagerly watching, and I have a feeling that there will be some kind of a very dramatic denouement pretty soon.
I would agree with you, because I think if you look at the politics of this thing, you now see Republicans joining the chorus. They've already joined, and they're applauding the appointment of the special counsel. And if I am a Republican and I am looking to the 2018 congressional elections, if there is something, if where the smoke is, there's fire, and it's discovered, I want it discovered as early as possible so we can deal with it, if necessary, deal with Mr. Trump, and move forward with the legislative agenda, whether it be with Trump or Pence running things. And I take no position on the validity of the legislative agenda, but if I'm a garden variety Republican or even a conservative one at this point, I want to get this thing over with so I can get back to business, namely get something out of this Congress and hopefully not lose the next one.
Agreed.
So, and I think the denouement, I think the denouement, quite frankly, will be Mr. Trump admitting something on Twitter that he doesn't know is a violation of the law, like what he said in his interview with Lester Holt on NBC. I thought
that he'd already decided to let Comey go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all of this stuff about, well, yeah, he hasn't admitted it yet, but I can see Trump saying he kicks everybody. He kicks Pence out of the room. He kicks the Attorney General out of the room. And he says, hey, can you go a little easy on my friend Mike Flynn? I mean, he's a good guy. I mean, that as you know, being from the New York area, that's a very, very East Coast thing, the term, he's a good guy, she's a good gal. And I can see Trump saying that because I've heard him say it.
There's a theory which I vacillate on, that he actually never wanted the job. He just wanted to run and stir things up. And then he actually got elected, and now he's going, damn, this is a whole lot more work than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I'd rather be playing golf. Mm-hmm. And running television shows. I tend to agree with you. I mean, if you really, really, really want to get absurd and out of the box, if the Russians have something on him, maybe they forced him to stay in the race.
Anything's possible at this point. I have read John le Carré novels that didn't have plots as improbable as this.
I would agree. So I think we're going to have an entertaining summer. You're not going to have to watch many reruns this summer because you're going to get fresh entertainment every day if you just tune in to either Fox or CNN or MSNBC or CNBC.
It's the best thing that's happened to the news media in years.
Yep, it sure is. And we will watch that with interest, but both of us have political opinions, whether we're experts or not. We're as expert as anybody else is. The opinions are our own. But moving to what you are an expert in is entertainment law and the music business. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, Holly?
My background is Wellesley College and Columbia Law School. And for the first year and a half out of law school, I worked for a large corporate litigation firm in New York City. I was what is popularly known as cannon fodder.
80-hour weeks.
Mm-hmm. And going to the printers to view SEC documents and proofread them. And I hated it, and I had always wanted to go into the music business. My grandfather was a very well-known lyricist. My father was a lyricist before he retired. So that was where my interest lay, but I'm tone deaf, and I was much more interested in the business end of it. So after a year and a half at the corporate firm, I managed to get myself a job with a very small entertainment law firm.
In New York or out here?
In New York, and from there I went to Polygram Records, and then I became a VP of Business Affairs at Polygram Records, and this was back when there was a Polygram Records, before it was eaten by Universal. And then I got Polygram to move me out to the West Coast because I had it with New York. I got held up at knife point twice.
Ouch.
Yeah, I wasn't waiting for a third strike. I was done. And so they moved me out here, and then I went to work for an artist management company because I wanted to see things from the other side. I wanted to know how the contract looked from all different directions. And then I became head of business and legal affairs at Polygram Music Publishing, when there was a Polygram Music Publishing, before it became part of Universal Music Publishing. And then I went to Disney.
How long were you with Disney?
I was at Disney just under 8 years. And
I bet you enjoyed it. I've heard good things about it.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I was there during the Iger period. I hear that it was not, during the Eisner period, it was not a really great place to be. And in fact, the nicknames for it were Mouseschwitz, Tinkerbellson, and Duckow.
Oh, God.
And apparently the motto was, if you don't come in Sunday, don't bother coming in on Monday. But by the time I got there, it wasn't like that at all. And I have to say, I always thought I was a much more cynical person, but it turned out that I'm not. I was pretty much humming, hi ho, it's off to work we go, every day when I went to work. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to work. They had a lot of people who had been there for a very long time, so there was a lot of institutional memory. Which is great, because then when you come in as a new person, you are fitting into a system that's working, as opposed to something where everything is a moving part.
I understand. We'll be getting to the meat of this in a minute, but I want to remind our listeners you are a very integral part of this entire affair, and we welcome your questions. And the way to get them in is to phone 661-298-5487. That's 298 KHTS. You can email me at dennis@hometownstation.com. But feel free to call and ask any entertainment law questions. Today would be the day to do that, since we have an expert on with us, or employment law questions. If something is a burning issue for you, I'll try and answer that. And Holly can put in her 2 cents on the employment side, too, since I have a feeling she knows a little about that as well. Okay.
A little, but not as much as I know about copyright.
Okay. Here we go. Here is the scenario that we're going to posit. I have just written a song. I am a singer-songwriter. I have finished my song, and I'll give you various scenarios. We'll start with the easy one, which is there is no question that I'm the sole author of this thing. I didn't have anybody else's help, and I've got a piece of sheet music, and I want to make sure that nobody steals it. What's the best way to prevent that?
Well, under the 1978 Copyright Act, it is protected, your work is protected by copyright the moment it is fixed in tangible form, which means that as soon as it leaves your brain and becomes an audio recording or sheet music or anything else, it is protected by copyright. So you don't need to register in order to protect your work. But in reality, you do want to register, because even though registration isn't mandatory, there are a lot of remedies that you can't get until you've registered the work. So, for example, if somebody stole your sheet music and recorded it, and you said, hey, that's my song, and you went to sue them, you can't sue for you can't get statutory damages and attorney's fees for infringements that occur prior to registration. So registering it is always a good idea. You can register a collection of works. So, for example, if you're a band and you've written 10 songs for an album and you don't want to have to pay to register each song separately, you can register it as a collection of works, and each title would be part of what is in that collective work titled the album. And then you only have to pay one registration fee. But registering it is a really good idea. The whole concept of poor man's copyright, which is where you put a copy of it in the mail to yourself and send it certified mail and have the date stamp and don't open the envelope so you can prove when it was sent, does not in fact work. That there have been cases where that has been proven not to work. So I would say you definitely want to register it. And it's easy. You can do it online now. In fact, they prefer that you do it online, and it's less expensive if you do it online.
How much, speaking of expense, how much does it cost?
It costs, for basic copyright, what you're talking about, single author, single song, it would be $35. And if you had written 10 songs, you wanted to register them all for $35, you could register it as Dennis Kennelly's 2017 Spring.
Ah, and it was a good spring, to be sure.
So there you go. It's really, really worth the investment.
And if I want to register it online, what's the website that I go to?
You go to www.copyright.gov, G-O-V, and it's actually a really good site. It has all of the forms available for registering different kinds of works. It will walk you through it. It will give you the answers to frequently asked questions. And if you really, really want to get into it, you can read the actual Copyright Act itself.
Interesting, and a lot easier than one would think. I mean, normally, I think most people are of the opinion either that copywriting something is unnecessary or easy, or that it's burdensome as heck and expensive, and it's obviously neither.
No, it's definitely a do-it-yourself proposition, and I've had clients come to me and say, "Can you please register this for copyright?" And I always explain that I will do it if they want, but they are really, it is not necessary to pay me an hourly fee to do this when it's something that they can and should do on their own.
I agree. Now, remember we started out with the proposition that our singer-songwriter wrote the song, him or herself, and there was no question about this. But now you get the question of he or she had a little help. Maybe somebody came in and tweaked it. Maybe somebody came in and rewrote it. Any number of things. How do those disputes get handled?
Those disputes are best handled by avoiding them in the first instance.
Exactly.
And the thing that you want to do is you want to lay out the ground rules either at the time. So one very common situation is where you have one writer who's signed to one publishing company and another writer who's signed to another publishing company, and the publishers will actively look to set up co-writes because they want to kind of cross-pollinate and get their writers out there and working. You have to be very clear at the outset about who wrote what, because if you have publishing company A claiming 52% of the song and publishing company B claiming 52% of the song, you really have a problem.
Yes.
So, and what will actually happen oftentimes in those cases is that there will be a dispute, and both parties will claim 52%, and at that point, the record company that is paying mechanical royalties will very cheerfully say, "Okay, there's a dispute. We're putting this account in suspense," and that means that they just suspend it and don't pay anybody until you guys sort it out.
Which is not what either side wants. So.
Right. So it does provide an incentive to resolve it, but your best bet, and oftentimes you'll have a band, so you'll have 4 or 5 guys, and it's best right after the song has been written and everybody agrees, okay, this is it, it's done. That's when you want to get an agreement as to who wrote what percent.
Absolutely. I've been through that with bands that I manage, and it works very well. Although while you're talking about it, it's amazing how egos can raise their ugly head and, well, this thing wouldn't be half as good as it is without my contribution, so I get 25%. Come on, you've provided one line,
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure you've gone through that.
Well, yes, and what a lot of working bands will do, because you also get into internal arguments in bands where you have 1 or 2 guys who are doing most of the writing and thus making way more money than everybody else. So then you get somebody in the band who's perhaps not as talented, and they're saying, "Hey, I wrote this song, we have to put this song on the album." And no one really wants to record the drummer's song. So
poor Ringo.
Yeah. Well, so the best way to handle that, and what's usually done, is that the so-called publisher's share of income will be shared equally amongst the band members, while the so-called writer's share of income will be shared only amongst those who actually wrote. So that way everybody gets a piece of the publishing income.
I like that. And we will go into more of that after we take this break. You're on the legal line with Dennis Kennelly and my guest, Holly Browdy, and we'll be back after these messages.